by the 19th century, people had come to understand that humanity was in some sense rather different from the natural world, that we were separate because we were intelligent and because we had created a thing called human culture. And this distinguished us from the base, raw elements of nature, that nature was about instinct and human beings were about reason and freedom and free will. And if you think about it, that's a very powerful idea, because that's the way that we organise the modern university. So we divide our universities between the sciences that study nature and the humanities that study human culture. So that division between nature and culture is a very, very powerful one. And then Darwin comes along, and Darwin says, no, we're not really separate or different from the natural world because we're evolved out of the natural world. And that's an incredibly powerful and rather upsetting idea, because all of a sudden he said that we are fundamentally connected with primates. We're evolved most recently and obviously from primates. So what you find after the publication of The Origin of Species is that the real controversy is not about how Darwin relates to the book of Genesis, for example. The real controversy is that all of a sudden he's telling people, well, you're just sophisticated primates. And then you get people protesting, saying, you know, my grandfather is not a monkey. And then you get all these cartoons of Darwin in publications that put the face of Darwin onto the face of an ape. So people are quite offended by this idea that in some sense we're reconnected by the natural world and we're not actually as sophisticated and superior as we thought we were. But then, this is a rather interesting idea, then of course we realise that because of Darwin we understand the natural world and we understand that we're evolved. So whereas Darwin reconnected us, the realisation that in fact we now know about the principle of natural selection and we know about our evolution puts us in a position of superiority again. So all of a sudden we're now able to manipulate our future evolution, and some biologists would even go so far as to say that human evolution, to all intents and purposes, is now at an end, because we can stop ourselves evolving in certain directions and help ourselves to evolve in other directions. And of course that then is the beginnings of the very, very dark and suspicious project called eugenics, genetic manipulation. And we live with those moral issues now all the time. To what extent do we not only genetically manipulate ourselves and not naturally select, but humanly select ourselves? To what extent do we genetically manipulate the natural world? Now, going back to the nature-culture thing, the nature-culture split, it seems that in one sense Darwin stopped the nature-culture split because he reconnected us with the natural world. But then it comes up again because we're superior to nature, because we know that we're evolved. So we've got the nature-culture split again. But then at the end of the 20th century, all of a sudden we have something called the environmental crisis. We realise that our relationship with the natural world is not at all straightforward, that we're messing things up, and that we are connected to the natural world because it's turning around and biting us. And this has enormous significance for how we treat nature. And there are phenomena that occur that are not readily classifiable as natural or cultural. Here's the obvious example: global warming. Is global warming a natural phenomenon, or is it a cultural phenomenon? And the answer to that is not entirely straightforward, probably both. So in this university in Nottingham, to which department do we send the problem of global warming? Do we send it to the natural scientists? Do we send it to the economists? Do we send it to the philosophers? Where does it go? It doesn't submit to this division between the natural and the cultural. So maybe then, well, let's look behind this nature-culture divide. Let's look to a time when we didn't live with this split, where we thought that we understood that we were more connected with the natural world, that we're part of a single creation, that the human beings and the natural world are both created, that they're integrated, that there is an order. And let's go back into the tradition that I live with and which we're all part of, whether we like it or not, because our world, our Western world, emerges out of this tradition, and see whether that can give us any ideas about how we reimagine our relationship with nature. And there are all sorts of resources that we find in the ancient scriptures and in ancient philosophy and theology and medieval philosophy and theology as well.